Assalamu alaikum, my dear respected viewers, and thank you for joining us again for another episode of Current Events. Like always, I'm your host, Ali Jassim. As time goes by, the world is witnessing an evolution and is entering a newer, more advanced phase that all human beings ought to adapt to in order to properly communicate with each other. Due to the immense development of technology, mainly means of communication, the world has been transformed into a global village. We can all firmly agree that there are no limitations nowadays on the countless ways of human interaction and communication. Brothers and sisters, stay tuned for this episode as we answer questions like, how much are we aware of the different ways of communication and interactions with other people, other countries, other scientists, and other politicians? Is a person able to communicate easily and freely with important figures from different countries as a Shia? How can we let the world know about our needs and conditions we are living through? What is the duty of the international communities? How can we join these international communities? What are the prerequisites of joining the international communities as a Shia? Do Shias hold any position in the United Nations to have their voice heard by the world? In this series of current events under the name of Importance of Shia Presence in International Communities, we will answer these questions and discuss other issues with our dear guest, Mr. Mojtaba Zakeri, head of the Washington D.C. based organization Free Muslim. Assalamu alaikum, Mr. Zakeri.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having me on your show.
Mr. Zakeri, for the first question, I would like to ask you, what exactly defines an international organization?
I'd like to start with sharing with you that an international organization is an organization that serves people outside of its zip code or its boundary, its country that's in. And a role of an international NGO or non-governmental organization is to work with others in the same field who have expertise, either more or less than them, and achieve goals that are important to human beings in today's era.
Great, thank you. Why do you think Shia people would need to utilize international organizations for proceeding with their demands and requirements? In other words, why would the Shias utilize international organizations if they would like to achieve their desires and wills?
Thank you, and that's a great question. The Shia of today are the same Shia of 1400 years ago, and the same needs apply to today, and they were as of 1400 years ago, 14 decades ago. And what are those needs? The needs of representing ourselves in the community abroad as an international community, and no other person or entity or government is able to represent us the way that we are able to represent ourselves. And if we look at the history of Islam, I think we find that our infallible Imams did the same thing. They had dialogue with other faiths. They were available to answer questions. They were the source of information when it came to disputes in the Islamic law. And the concern is who else in the time of absence of our Imam, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shorten his labor, who else can represent the Shia other than the pluralistic representation in the international entity such as the UN, the United Nations, or the European Union? And if we do not represent ourselves, we have lacked the ability to tell the international community what is it that the Shia does and what is our beliefs. If we stay out of that environment, we have neglected to let others know what do we stand for.
Mr. Zakeri, just let me ask you this question. Can Shia people introduce themselves to the world merely by joining these international organizations, or are there more efficient ways of doing so?
Okay, that's another great follow-up to the previous question, and I want to address it this way. At the time of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, when he held open to all meetings what was it that he focused on? We have to understand and keep in mind that Imam alayhi salam, by his way of living, has showed us our footsteps that we have to follow. And some of that is that those of us who are experts in Islamic law, those of us who are experts in human rights, those of us are enthusiastic to help others other than going in person and handing out a blanket or a cup of water or keeping someone warm or hosting someone at our house. Some of us are able to do that. The rest of us are those who are able to speak, as we are doing that in this interview, and I appreciate that. Those of us who are able to speak and those of us who are able to do something other than in person, physically going to another place and helping another human being should make ourselves available to others. And that's what our imams did. Our imams held, Imam Zakeri held open to all. Everyone was invited to his meetings, and everyone was able to ask questions. Our fuqaha today have made mountains of knowledge and wealth available to us as Shia, to the small circle, but now we have to expand that to the international community. Today is the era that the social media, that the internet, that being available abroad, that the global village has broadened the distances closer to each other, and someone who lives in Iraq or someone who lives in Saudi Arabia, Iran, in Japan, in other sides of Middle East, in Africa, does not mean Europe, doesn't matter. If they are able to educate others, the core values that our Islam has taught us throughout the years, our duty of today is to make that knowledge available to others and either join other international communities that do that, or work or volunteer with other entities. UN, for example, has volunteering groups that either travel abroad or are able to help refugees. For example, in the time of now, there are so many refugees and they're unable to show what their culture is or what their heritage is. And the extremism of that's happened in the Middle East has overtaken the rights, the right of dignity, the right of humanity. Now, as a human being, I have few choices to make. A choice of staying and just listening to the news, maybe sharing it on my social media or retweeting or other means of social media, or physically going to a place that's troubled, like Syria, like Yemen, like Bahrain, like other parts of Asia, like Africa, and helping human beings physically. Or in the third part of this solution-based type of thing is to promote rights of people whose rights are being violated. So when other organizations who are from other faiths, they want to help out these people, are able to connect with someone who speaks their language, knows their culture. When someone is in trauma, fleeing from, for example, Syria to Europe, they have they face the inability to explain what their culture is. Now, someone who lives in Europe, and many of my friends do, someone who lives in Europe, if they stand up and say, hey, listen, this is their culture, this is what they believe in, this is what they stand for, the integration of that person within the new society becomes much easier. And that's what our Islam has taught us. The religion of peace is the religion that gathers everyone within it, as opposed to, okay, I may have disputes with you ideologically, but I'm going to sit in my house and I'm not going to promote it. That's not what our imams did. And I think we need to stand for what our religion has taught us, and that is the culture of dialogue, the culture of peaceful coexistence, and making that available to the international community differs their minds from Islam is a religion that they cannot communicate with.
As we all know, the followers of other religions and ideologies utilize international organizations to achieve their wills and demands. My question here is that how are these groups doing so? What are they doing different to benefit themselves?
Okay. I'm glad you opened that up to the other faith and other cultures. We barely see that in a TV station, in other places where they only represent themselves. And I thank you and your volunteers and team there that are making these programs available to others so they can learn what the international community really does. I want to take a moment and share with you what the UN is, what was the cause of creating an entity called United Nations. United Nations, as you know, it's not United Countries. It's called United Nations. Now, nations are explained differently, but in 1945, when 51 countries signed up to adhere to human rights for all, some of the things that they did was set up millennium goals. And I'm going to take it back to where your question was. Your question was, how is it that the faith-based communities are able to utilize these general global mechanisms to advance their causes? And that's a beautiful question. I may have reiterated your question a little bit, but the Millennium Goals, right now, for example, the 8 Millennium Goals that the UN does have, and I'm going to read them very quickly to you. The eliminating poverty, achieving primary education, gender equality, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, and environmental sustainability and global partnership for development. This is on their website, and these are the laws, these are the goals that all these countries, and now there are more than 193 countries, member of United Nations. These countries have signed agreements that we are advancing these 8 Millennium Goals. Now, any of us thinking at home, do we not know some of these goals that we can help with? Eliminating poverty, we already do that in our faith by putting sadaqah or just by putting some charity aside. Achieving primary education. In Karbala, a city that education, or Najaf or Qom, in cities that the education is merged within the religious ideology, those entities have to be represented in a non-governmental manner. Because governments, after, and this is all governments, and I don't mean it in any specific government or any country, here it's just a general description of what do faith-based entities need to do to achieve their goals. And that is, governments in general have their economic and social and political aims. Regardless of in which continent they are, they have different goals that they need to achieve. Now, in Islamic representation, or for that matter, a Shia representation, cannot be achieved until we as Shias, as regular civilians, as people that we do not belong to a particular sect of a political system or anything, we have to represent ourselves by making ourselves available. Now, let me give you a very good small example of something that could be given up to a larger entity of the UN and their assistance in achieving it. For example, achieving primary education, which is the goal number 2 of the United Nations. We have so many schools and universities in the countries that are developing in the Middle East, in Africa. And so many of our organizations have started their offices there, are helping there. These organizations need fundings, need more material and curriculum for studying. They need more educational assistance, teachers, volunteers. If they become part of the UN, they're able to use the national resources, if it's in Africa, for example, in Nigeria, use the national resources in Nigeria that they already have access to and expand that. And besides that, they're able to gather the international efforts that are number 2 of the Millennium Goals for achieving primary education to help and send volunteers there, send educators there, educate the teachers there, give them better facilities, build better facilities. So instead of this being for the sake of God, and let me just some of our humanitarian people think that doing something for sake of Allah means that no one else understands about it and no one else is educated about it, because I only wanted to do it for Allah, and Allah knows that. If that's your aim, Allah understands that, knows that, and that's His knowledge. But promoting that within the international community is something that's our responsibility. That means that with every dollar that you spend, you achieve more for that $1. If $1 only goes 1 mile or 1 kilometer, that $1 could go 10 miles if we utilize the international community, other organizations in our area, to help us achieve these goals.
What kind of skills should be strengthened and attained by Shia people, and what are the prerequisites in order to enter or join such prominent and effective world organizations?
Okay. I want to share this with you, and I know other people that have done the same thing. Due to the turmoil and the unease, the instability that's happening in the Middle East right now, seeing many of our friends that we grew up with going to very hard situations, losing family members and loved ones. I know many people that started with doing what they can do in sharing their skills with other organizations and slowly get into what they want to achieve. And let me give you an example. If there were more organizations focusing in the rights of Shia in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, just by being present in those entities, when situations happen that they started killing Shias systematically, or other people of other faiths were being killed, we could say that, okay, this is the way to achieve this goal. How can we protect these people? And I give you one example of someone who did what he could do, and he saved many lives in Syria. I refer him by only his first name, if I may. Jafar, one of my great friends, we grew up in Syria together. When I traveled to the U.S., he had a contact with one of our like-minded organizations, Shia Rights Watch. And I personally work for Free Muslim Association, and we both have ECOSOC status at the UN. Both organizations are Shia-based, very active. So Jafar called us and he said, listen, there are X marks on houses of people, and he lives in Syria at the moment. There are X marks on houses of people in Syria in this particular area, and there is a announcement of, if you do not leave by tomorrow at noon, we will either come in or kill you, or whatever the case may be, take everything you have. And this is when ISIS was in Syria spreading its words, beginning of it about 3 years ago. All Jafar could do was to reach out to another organization that he knows and may be able to advance his cause to get what he wants, is to save these people. Jafar could just flee, right? Jafar just could take his family and say, okay, I'm out of here. I know this, and I don't need to help anybody else. Escaping one family is much easier than about 20, 30 families. And what happened was, when we understood that there are more than 100 families facing the same problem in the same area, by a small research that Jafar does, we gathered many buses to take them from Syria to Lebanon. And those of us who have lived in that region know that the route from Syria to Lebanon is only 2 hours. These buses took 3 days to get to Lebanon, but many families were saved. Now, Jafar could have gone on social media and said something to just, hey, I feel sad that there are X marks on my house. But no, Jafar took the next step, and that was by calling and becoming involved in person, physically himself, with some organization that has an international reach. Now, what I tell my friends is, become an international organization. Become an organization that you can help others just by the knowledge you have. There are so many parts of northern Iraq, there are so many parts of Syria, so many parts of other countries, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Indonesia, Malaysia, and I can count you many countries. We even received calls from Madagascar, and by then I honestly thought it's just a cartoon, but then it's actual country. It has people, it has Shias in it, jokingly said, as a cartoon thing. But when we understood that the Shias of Madagascar need help, it's the same thing. Someone reached out, and that was all they could do. So what I suggest is, do what you can, because that's important. Some of us can contact other organizations. Some of us are educators and we have wealth of knowledge. Share that with others. Some of us are able to travel abroad and be present at the conferences that happens. And I want to give you a United Nations level example that how is it that a Shia organization can join a bigger entity like the United Nations and be effective, because that's a big question I get asked all the time. Okay, you go to the UN. Are you effective? What can you do? Have you changed anything? Like, were you able to meet someone that's important? And I tell them, I meet people that are right hands of country presidents that you only see in news in person, a feet away from me. And I speak with them in person and I tell them what's happening in their countries. Free Muslim focuses on, and Free Muslim, if I want to share, if I may, Free Muslim is an entity that focuses on non-violent Islamic perspective and says that Islam is a non-violent religion. Islam has always been non-violent, and this violent behavior and extremism that you see in the Middle East increasingly, it has nothing to do with Islam, and we promote different policies. Now, when I do go to the UN, and UN is conducting its research on a particular country, and I have done this multiple times. For example, Malaysia and Indonesia, in their laws, in their bylaws per se, they do not have, and let me pull this up right here, they do not have Shia mentioned in their laws at all. And what does that to the Shia is that they are, when it comes to a UN level to protect minorities, for example, in Indonesia or Malaysia, when the state law has not mentioned the vocabulary Shia within it to protect, the humanitarian global level has no umbrella to use or no law to use and say, hey, okay, minorities are such, and the Shias. And what I have done at the UN is I attend these conferences and I tell researchers that UN hires that the state law of such and such country does not include the Shias in them. Address that in your report, and you ask them, why is it that these minorities that are more than 3% in such country, more than 7% in other countries, more than 12% in other parts of Africa, why aren't they included in their laws? Because every country has its own law, and then they sign laws with the international community that they're going to protect rights of humans, they're going to give them the rights, they're able to vote, they're able to go higher up in the economic or political entities of each country. If they are addressed in the law of the country, now the upper level UN or international community is able to enforce that country to say, hey, listen, you signed basic human rights, and now we want you to protect your citizens. If Shias are not citizens of a country, they're not seen as a citizen of a country, how else can we protect them? So personally, on a UN level, I've seen that the Shias have been stepping up their game, if I may say, that they're more present, and their representation has gone a long way.
So we can come to the conclusion that if Shia people would like to enter the international organizations, they need no special skill. The important key is to properly introduce themselves. Is this a true statement, or would you like to add something else?
Okay, just to ensure and I reiterate, ensure what's needed is the willpower for the Shias to make themselves present in these organizations that are international. And by being present, they're able to educate others what their faith stands for. And if they are able to educate others for what their faith stands for, they're able to protect not only their own immediate family, but also the families around them and many other lives that if we were able to be present, and I give you this as an example, if we were able to be present as for example, UN level towards Bahrain, so much of the turbulence that the Bahrain has faced within the past years would not have happened. Now, what I suggest is utilize the best skills you do have. The highest education is not the primary cause or need to get involved in these organizations. These organizations are looking for people with no bias, people who are not taking this side or that side. This is me, this is them. That's what ISIS is doing all around. What we need to do, and that's what the madhab of Ithna Ashari has taught us, the 12 imamers, that you represent the true fiqh of Islam and you let people pick. Because when people are educated of true values, they are able to communicate with us, represent us, and stand side by side with us. So no hierarchy in education is needed. Education, unless it's expertise in human law, expertise as a lawyer, expertise in fiqh, expertise in negotiations. These obviously are skills that help us. But our ideology, or the ideology of Shia Islam, is driven from Quran and from Ahl Bayt. And the more we get closer to that, the better we are able to represent what the Shia Islam aims to do. And I want to draw an example from one of the scholars that has played a key role in many of our lives. Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Shirazi, may God bless his soul, and may he rest in peace. He spread and worked day and night to make available a mountain of wealth, more than 1,100 books in the Islamic law, specific laws of econ, laws of banking, laws of Islamic. There are multiple laws, the laws between parents, the laws between child, the laws between siblings. This Grand Ayatollah mentions in one of his books over 100 laws that if you look at the international community, unfortunately, I think there's only 10, 15 that they would have actual laws for. For example, laws for prisoners. Sure, how depth do you get in that? Laws for protecting rights of women. How depth do you get in that? Laws of protecting your faith. Laws of boundary, freedom of this. There's so many freedoms that Sayyid Muhammad mentions in his books that for years and years, researchers need to make their time available to understand what exactly he was letting out for us to learn and understand what Prophet ﷺ and his family ﷺ have taught us. Now, some of us are able to read the Islamic books and are able to educate others, and we're good storytellers. Some of us are good writers. Some of us are good listeners. All of those and many other skills are needed, but more than any of that are willpower. In 1945, when the United Nations was assembled by 51 countries, the necessity of the time was there is a need for conversation, there is a need for dialogue, there is a need for pluralistic representation. And it's the same thing that's happening right now. If back then we had no UN, I assure you right now that now and the time of today would have forced us to make another UN or a UN right now. And it probably would have been focused in Karbala, as a city that many Shia faith are able to freely come there so far and attend these conferences and high-level conferences to represent themselves. So the UN and similar entities were made to make this dialogue available. And in order to have dialogue, we do not have to have particular expertise in order to think, okay, I need to do this much research in order to be able to help. No, who you are is a representation of a heritage, of a faith, of a culture, of an ideology. Those are four valuable things. And if you add that to the international community, our community will be much better in dialogue, and it would advance a lot quicker than we think. There is a lack of dialogue between nations, and that has led, my friends, that has led to others writing our history. If you look at the online data, if you look at the international community, the extremists vanish our faith, or trying to vanish our faith. But what happens is, right after that, they write the history of what happened after that war. And we need to change that, and we can change that only by our willpower and by being present in the international community as a non-governmental entity to ensure that we are offering these other organizations and nations the information they need in order to make the right decision about whom to have relations with and whom not to. A country may say that today this policy is good, tomorrow this policy is not good. The faith is not based on policies that could change. Our faith is based on policies that are everlasting, and we believe that Islam is able to have its laws adopted by all. Islam believes that its culture brings people together as opposed to despairing them. So by being present and making this a more colorful environment, by adding us to it, that's a big step. And only those who are present in the international level right now are writing the history, writing the laws, writing what should happen, writing what happened. And it's our fair chance to step up and represent the heritage and the culture that our parents have given to us, and tell the international community that we stand for healthy, peaceful, pluralistic, colorful coexistence. And that is exactly what the timing of Prophet was. And it was not a us against them, it's us as people are created equal. And as Imam Ali says, and I will shorten this, people are either created as your brother in faith, if not, they're your brother in humanity. We can maintain that, and we have a wealth of knowledge from Ahlul Bayt that we can share with people. And I think that's very much all it takes to step up in the international community, as opposed to waiting years and years and years to maybe step in and maybe make ourselves available.
For the last question in this episode, I would like to ask you of your point of view about whether or not the conflicts and hardships suffered by Shia will be resolved through utilizing the power of international organizations. In other words, will there be problems and hardships faced by Shia people due to them disregarding the international organizations?
Okay, if I may, I want to address your question in this manner, where the global community, the global village, and that's not due to any reason or any culture wanting it to be that way, but the basics of it is, you may have something that I don't, I sell you what I have, you sell me vegetables, I sell you fruit, you should educate me about your culture. Some of this is, heritage is something that we take forward with us. By being available in the international community, we are able to ensure that the new generations of laws that are being passed include our kids in it. If we do not advance forward, all we're doing is going in circles and circles and circles, and that's unhealthy for human beings. Just imagine it this way. If the advancement of phone, then it became a smartphone, then it's going to become something else virtual that we have never seen. If the first stage does not communicate with the next stage, there would be no advancement. And now how can I connect that to the Shia as a faith and an ideology? in advancement of technology, in advancement of health, in advancement of economic laws, everything is becoming more complex and intertwined. Now, some of the things that, for example, banking laws that some of the Middle Eastern countries promote in order to move their funds, for example, some of the economic laws that they promote or other countries promote, it's focused on mainly what that country wants, and it's not focused on what Islam truly may represent. If we do not step into this platform and give the international community the 100% of the Islamic banking laws in that example, what is happening is they will set up laws that are Islamic banking. Now for about 10, 15 years, you and I have to say, oh my God, now I cannot bank with this European country. On their website, and their representatives say that we have Islamic laws here, we have Islamic loans. And trust me, many people in Europe face difficulties with loans and with many banking systems just because the Islamic laws that are introduced to them lack representation from all of the Shia or other minorities that are within Islam. So by making ourselves available to the international community, and I give you the Islamic banking laws as just one example, by making ourselves available and making that 10-15% resource that they have from other sects of Islam, making that into a 90 or 100% laws that are based on Islam. Now all Shias or other minorities within Islam or other faith are able to do banking globally, and there will be no more trouble. But if we don't do that, 15 years from now, someone will feel too much pressure. They will want their rights. They're going to reach the international community. They're going to push that 10% to maybe 25%. Okay, for another 15, 20 years, continuously this will happen. And the laws are changing so rapidly that the time of change is right now. The changes that happen within countries affects the lives of people for years and years. 200 years ago, if in Bahrain there were more representation of other minorities, there would be less people killed today. In Africa, if there were more representation of people who are indigenous to there or migrated to the years ago, or in Asia, in Europe, there would have been better laws. In France, and this is a first world country, in France there is still a problem of hijab to an extent. In Belgium, there is not much of a freedom to the extent that we do see in the Middle East. Now, I don't think the freedom of hijab means that you cover yourself entirely or you do not cover yourself. I am not a religious scholar to say anything about that. I am a humanitarian, and I want to take you back to the humanitarian side of it. If in the laws of Europe, if you're able to affect those laws to be more inclusive, we're able to reduce the extremism that we see happening after generations. And that extremism affects us in person, affects our families, affects our Islam, affects the ideology that we live and grew up with, and the hope that we know the Imam will reappear, and his reappearance will bring more freedom to people as opposed to controlling them more. So taking you back, as Shias, it is important to contact other organizations that do similar thing to us. I want to share with you something that's very important, and I have seen it firsthand. I was in Geneva about 6 months ago, and we're having a human rights meeting there. It was the human rights session. A woman from Western Sahara, and Western Sahara faced very similar situation that the Shias are facing right now. About 20 years ago, she approaches me and she says, Mojtaba, you have mentioned in your speech that the Shias are going through different violations in the Middle East, and she named a few countries. And I said, yes. She said, well, our people went through the exact same thing about 20 years ago. Can you imagine that? I was alive, you were alive, and many of our audience were alive when 20 years ago such incidents were happening, where mass graves were happening in Western Sahara. Now, if we worked with the Western Saharans then, they would have stood by us a lot more right now. When I told her that in Bahrain such and such is happening, or Syria there are mass killings, or in Iraq, she said, oh wow, I had no idea. I'm glad you told me. Now I can help these people, because my grandma or my mother, some of these kids were born in these camps, understood exactly what it means to be a woman, a Shia woman or a Shia child, or of any other minority who's being violated in the Middle East. And only by my presence and sharing with her the simple vocabularies of, in Syria, in Iraq, women and kids are being killed for no reason. This ignited a light in her mind. When she was growing up in a camp, and this particular woman lived in a camp for over 10 years. When she was growing up in a camp, she had tears in her eyes, and she told me, Mojtaba, within the 3-hour meeting, that the conference that we had, and your 15-20 minutes of a speech, when you mentioned those things, I relived moments of those 10 years within seconds in my eyes. Now, if we do not make ourselves available, my friends, we have lacked representation, and no one else is to blame than us. That people are going through same thing every day. People are being killed, and we have been taught by the scholars and experts in fiqh and our ulama, our maradi, that if you want to be a correct human being, you do what's right. And today, if we accept we live in a global village, and it's truly a village, if we accept that, then it's very normal for us to do something for our neighbor. It's very normal for us to protect someone who lives a few houses away from us, and now it's a few countries away. That's fine. The social media, the internet has made that available. We're able to extend our reach, and if people see the beauty of the Shia Islam, not only they would accept its laws and promote its laws within their country, but in addition to that, they would understand the hope that many of the families in the Middle East live with day in and day out, the hope of someone to restore their freedom, the hope of the freedom of speech, the freedom of dignity, the freedom of existing. These freedoms are freedoms that we can promote as Muslims and as Shia in particular.
Inshallah, the voice of the Shia will be heard worldwide, and a very near end to their miseries. Thank you so much, dear brother Mojtaba Zakeri, head of Free Muslim World Organization.
All right, I appreciate you and I appreciate your audience, and hope I've shed some light on important issues. Thank you so much.
Brothers and sisters, this concludes the first episode in the series of the importance of Shia presence in international communities here on Current Events. We thank you, dear viewers, for watching, and we thank our dear guest, Mr. Mojtaba Zakeri, for joining us. Be sure to join us for the next episode. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.